All right, I'm a recovering perfectionist. Yes, I
I
am.
am not.
You're not. But here's the thing. If you're a perfectionist, it has pros and cons, but you really need to look at the cons because it impacts your whole life, causes a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, depression, burnout. That's what I, work with my clients on a lot. So if you're not addressing the perfectionism in you and that mindset, that fixed mindset of things need to be perfect, it does have an impact on your well-being, on your health, on your relationships. And it's a very fine line how to navigate through that. In this episode, we're going to cover the pros and cons and also where is it coming from? And how can you recover, as I call it, recovering perfectionist? But what can you do to shift out of that perfectionism into a more balanced, healthy way of dealing and managing the things that you would like to accomplish? And like I said, I'm jokingly call it recovering perfectionist because I am one. Welcome. I'm Heike Fallon. I'm a personal high performance coach, and I help my clients with their self-leadership, and a lot of these high performers are perfectionists. And once we address that, it changes how they lead themselves and how they can lead others.
Awesome. I am Shannon Passalacqua, and I am a high performance coach as well. And I help women heal after miscarriage. And I am not a recovering perfectionist. I am the furthest thing from a perfectionist. But if you're not a perfectionist, don't turn this off
Yeah.
because you might have some perfectionism traits in you that you probably don't know about or need to work on.
Yeah, absolutely. We're gonna want to cover that too. As I always like to kind of get a little brain perspective in there. So let's first off, there's always a question: is this genetic? Am I born with this? Where's this coming from? And there can be, there's research done that it's possible that it's genetic, but it's a lot our environment. So it's a lot of the environment we grow up from, cultures, parenting. Look at schools, right? It's all about getting 100%. It needs to be
Mm-hmm.
all perfect to get the grades. And so it definitely comes a lot from the environment and how we grow up.
Yeah,
Um,
there's a lot of the nature versus nurture, the psychology of it. And I think with this, you might have a sense of perfectionism in you, but again, like you said, like how it's nurtured will kind of determine how you're going to present and how it's going to show up in your life. And I think a lot of the people that I know that are perfectionists, I can see how they were raised and I can see how it came out, and how it kind of was instilled in them through their family values or through the school system. So I think it's an interesting concept.
yeah, and per definition, it's really about, let's cover that first too, actually really thriving for that flawlessness. Like the problem with perfectionists is they often set very unrealistic goals and for their own performance. And then also, most of the time, they're very critical of themselves. That's
Mhm.
really where, because there's a little fine difference between the high achiever and the perfectionist. The high achiever sets better realistic goals versus the perfectionist. Oftentimes the goals are way out there. And that's definitely one thing I used to do. Like my goal setting was like I
I
have,
have a question.
this big vision or something, and then it doesn't happen.
I have a question.
Sure.
And I mean, you would know better than I would. People who are perfectionists, do they have low self-esteem? And that is why they're trying to be perfect because they're trying to maybe prove themselves?
No, it could be the other way around. Because of that, they may
They have too high of self-esteem?
no, they could develop the more low self-esteem from constantly not achieving that. It really, so it's not necessarily starting there.
So there's like a chicken and egg situation
There's
there,
a
like which
chicken and
one's
egg
first?
situation, but I don't think it's so much, or at least not as far as research that I've seen, because what happens really in the brain, different areas are more highly activated, like the prefrontal cortex. So here in the front, where's our decision making and planning and that kind of stuff. So they're usually very strong in planning and decision making and structuring. And so the prefrontal cortex is much more activated. And then also the area what's called the anterior cingulate cortex, which has to do with mistake analyzing and that kind of stuff. So they're really good in that structural analyzing kind of component. So oftentimes their brain is more developed in that direction, and that's where the genetic part comes into play, because those areas are more hyperactive and sensitive. With that, also the amygdala, where there's a lot of the connection with the emotions, and a big factor is dopamine release. It's kind of like a little bit an addiction rather than the low self-esteem. It's more like trying to accomplish something and then getting the dopamine release, and then really wanting to accomplish more. It's kind of like more, I would consider it more like in the direction of addiction rather than coming with low self-esteem. I don't think it's coming from that. If anybody has a research study, I've never seen one, but it's really more in the direction of wanting that accomplishment, that dopamine release.
Yeah.
So I would say more there.
That might explain why I'm not a perfectionist. Because people, I have ADHD. People who have ADHD have a lower dopamine level.
Could be. And it could be too that people with ADHD usually struggle also with the structural component and the decision making, and exactly the opposites, right? That as far as the brain areas that are more active in ADHD are more likely exactly the other ones.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So again, I mean, we don't want to go too deep in there, and it's very superficial right now here on the brain perspective. It's not the purpose. It's really more the purpose of this to give you a little bit an idea that there are different areas activated, and we know now we can change the brain, though. We can work on it the same way we can work on ADHD. We did actually a whole episode on that. There's strategies on shifting that and coping with it, but that does not mean it heals it. It's just strategies. To do the same with perfectionism, there's strategies to shift out of it. Now, ADHD is a little like, we don't want to I wouldn't want to compare those two. Perfectionism is a little easier to shift out to than ADHD. So don't get me wrong on that. But there are strategies to and that we'll cover as well. But I think first we need to talk about how to recognize that you are a perfectionist. And I think one big one is, like I said, the goal setting. The goal setting. They're like a little too much out there. They might be a little more unrealistic. And I think too is there can be a fear of failure to, if I don't reach that people really get stressed out for not reaching that. I didn't have that too much, but I definitely been the more unrealistic goal setter for a while.
How did you discover that you were a perfectionist? Did someone have to tell you, or was it like a
No,
light bulb moment?
I just knew. I'm like, it needed to be certain ways, and other people around me didn't get it. And I'm like, why am I the only one here? Like,
So was it affecting the people
uh,
around you and your relationships? Because I would imagine it would.
well, definitely, because it gets me upset, right? Because if I'm getting upset, why are other people not doing it the way I would?
Right.
I have it envisioned. Not that it needs to be my way. It's just like I was struggling with. I think it needs to be, for me to feel good, it needs to be this way. But then I have to do it myself or myself. And like, why am I having this vision, right? And a perfect example, though, too, is when we first starting doing some videos. When I started doing any videos, I didn't feel comfortable making videos. And
Right.
I could have like have all reasons to look at it and go like, oh my God, I don't like this, I don't like that about it. And I would never put it out. I'd be the one not putting out. And it wasn't so much the courage. It was just like in my, like it's a certain vision in the head, how I wanted to look like.
Mhm.
And that's almost impossible. And everybody tells you just put it out, just put it out. Well, I couldn't put it out. I actually had one of my sons put the stuff out because I would have never in a million years put it out there. So I actually just recorded it, didn't even look at it, and just handed it over. And then it's out there. That's actually one
Interesting.
strategy already, get help. But I knew one way I knew too is that I would have not put it out. And it
Yeah.
wasn't the courage or what other people think. It was like me. I wanted it to be a certain way. I don't really care what other people think. It was really more me constantly beating myself, right? My own expectation of myself, how good it should be on things. And that's really where it's stronger, to well, I want to do my best, and what's in my head, my vision of what my best is where the competition is for me. So
Yeah.
it was a lot more to with realizing, like, if I don't do certain things, it's not going to move me forward. And procrastination is a part of it. So there's definitely procrastination showing up for me where I didn't move forward because I felt like it needs to be a little better. I can do better. It needs to be better. And then
Yeah.
it wouldn't happen at all. Delegating tasks can be an issue.
Yes.
The perfectionists have a hard time giving it up because if somebody else doesn't do it the way, it's not, they're not mad at them. It's just such a internal struggle as a perfectionist.
Well, it's interesting because I used to be a teacher, and I would say a lot of teachers are perfectionists. Um, a little controlling because they want things to go like be a certain way. And a lot of teachers that I worked with, and not, I was a special ed teacher, so it wasn't always special ed teachers because we had to learn how to just let things go because nothing was going to, things were going to change every day, every moment, and nothing was going to go the way that you had planned. But the other teachers that I worked with, they had a very hard time with delegating. And, if a substitute would come in and do something, in a different way than they would have done it, they would get upset. And I found it very interesting as an observer, as a non-perfectionist, to watch. But there were some aspects of when I was a teacher where I was like, I'm not going to give this over to anyone else. Like I had 6 paras that worked in my classroom, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to give this to you guys because this is how I want it to look, but not to the extent of like.
Well, and that's the problem, right? Because it's a fine line, right? Where things be. But the perfect example when it comes to teachers too, and especially more the younger ages, I think when there's art projects, how much the teacher goes in and corrects an art project or let it be, which that part I've always been very good at, as far as like, you do your thing. If it's your thing, you do your thing. Like it's more stuff that affects that I'm involved in. If somebody else, I don't care. You do your thing there. But I think that's where you can see somebody being a perfectionist if they have the urge to go and correct something on somebody else instead of letting them be. But also one other thing I think is it's a very much a mindset of all or nothing, right? It needs to be like either it's going to be perfect in all, or I'm not going to, it's just nothing. We're not doing this at all.
Right.
Like that all or nothing kind of approach. And keep that in mind. Like, it's not like I'm not a perfectionist in all areas of life. Like there's certain things like, I've never been like hosting a party. It's not like it needs to be everything perfect with every detail on there. I never cared about that. So I think it depends on, you can be also a perfectionist at work and not at home or in other areas. So it doesn't always mean you're a perfectionist in everything. But the key is to recognize, when are you a perfectionist and when doesn't it serve you? So in when is it holding you back? And where is it actually serving you? Because the pro is that a perfectionist really works a lot on self-development. They constantly trying to improve. They constantly trying to move forward, which is a good thing. They also, by setting the bar a little higher, they thrive for bigger and more, and tend to also possibly go a little bit more out of, in some ways, sometimes, or not out of the comfort zone, but pushing the boundaries a little bit, because they setting the bar a little higher. So it has pros as well.
So then I would say, to that is, if you are a perfectionist, if you identify as a perfectionist, one of the ways to work on it would be to work on your mindset. And instead of having a fixed mindset, would be to have a growth mindset, and to work on continuously work on growing, your mindset.
What helped me a lot with really developing the mindset, and I always had really a growth mindset in other ways, but in certain things it was definitely fixed there, was to learn to celebrate the process along the way. That was a huge one for me, to shift into a growth mindset, to the areas where I felt like I was more perfectionist, to really go like, hey, you know what? I put that video out there, even though I don't think it's, and it's kind of funny now looking back. I'm like, oh
we do it so
man,
much.
they got so much better, But
hey, I have a question.
sure.
What do you mean by celebrate? What does that look like?
Okay, so for me, literally, I in the very beginning, I started literally every night journaling and writing down 3 things I'm accomplished for myself, and a small win that could be, putting out but particularly things that weren't perfect, right? To actually looking at things like, you know what, I put the video out even though it wasn't perfect. I celebrated the unperfect, but
So
yet
it was
moving
more
forward.
of a letting yourself feel accomplished and proud of yourself. It
Yep.
wasn't like I'm going to go out to a
Throw a party.
celebratory dinner and open a bottle of champagne every time you do
No,
something.
I always was good with that. If it comes down to celebrating that, I'm good. I was always good with that, but
Well,
I was never good at looking at small accomplishments along the way, and then honoring myself for, hey, you know what? You moved this project further forward. It moved forward, instead of like, like I said, with putting a video out, or working on something that is a very big complex thing, like a course or something, and to wait until it's done to celebrate it with a bottle of champagne. No. But like, and they're like, hey, you know what, I got a module done, or I got the outline done, to kind of take a moment and just go, you know what, dang, I did that today. and
so
and
I think that's a really important distinction to make, because I think oftentimes if we throw around that term of, oh, you should celebrate yourself, or da da da, and it may sound like, oh, I think the way that we interpret that is it should be an outward thing. We
yeah,
should
no,
celebrate outward. When I think in reality, we should be celebrating inward and letting ourselves feel the feelings of, I'm really proud of myself for
yeah,
doing that, instead of just like moving on, right? Like, oh, I got that done, move on to the next step, which I think is what perfectionists do, right? They're like, oh, well, I
yeah.
did that. Now I need to
Yeah, I
like
never
up it.
stopped. I never stopped along the way and acknowledged myself for accomplishing anything along the way. It was the end product when it's done, but the little
The
along the
little
way
steps.
progress celebration, and recognizing that I did that, and giving myself some credit for it. I didn't do that at all.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, for me, was a big shift
Mm-hmm.
in helping to really foster more that growth mindset, and acknowledging the journey. and
Right.
me moving forward. And hey, I'm far away from where I wanted to be, but just celebrating and like you said, more internally, I think is super important, but definitely what helped me the most, I think.
I think that's an interesting and a good distinction to make.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, it's usually also a good thing about the perfectionists, they're usually very structured and organized because they know they moving forward, they got it all structured and organized, because they already know what their end goal is supposed to look like, and they like I said, they're usually better in thinking and structuring anyways, and so they tend to do that very well. The downside is, though, you can burn out, and
Mm,
you definitely can um you know start with negative self-talk and self-doubt along the way. So when things aren't seem to be so far away from that big
yeah.
unrealistic goal, so it can absolutely impact your mental health. Obviously, anxiety, depression comes with that too. And it can affect relationships. And so there's a very fine line of taking the advantage of the pros and not letting it fall too far into the con area. So that's why it's very important, I think, the self-awareness, recognizing, where am I having that fixed mindset of more perfectionism? Where do I need to shift it? And then again, what are the best strategies for me? So one we said is celebrating yourself, setting definitely more realistic and smaller goals. So I used
Mm.
to have these also, like my problem was like the longest list of goals to do in that day. And then at the end of the day, it wasn't even a quarter that I got done until I really literally sat down and gave everything a buffer time. And
Oh,
by
yeah.
giving everything a buffer time and creating a slot for the curveballs that always seem to come that I ignored, that
Yeah.
derail
Life
everything,
happens.
I slashed basically the amount of goals that I had to a lot less. And that was definitely very helpful as well. Um, Self-compassion. I know we've talked about in a full episode on self-compassion.
Mhm.
That's, I think, a huge thing that perfectionists forget about.
Yeah. Giving
Being
yourself
more
a lot of grace.
be more kind to yourself. Like the self-criticism is so strong. Um, there's
Well,
different. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
would say that goes hand in hand with celebrating.
It does. It does, but it's also, I think, a lot more recognizing when the negative thoughts come up, recognizing when we're self-critical, too
Mhm.
critical. So it does come hand in hand, but it is something to be more aware of too. So if you're a perfectionist who's very critical with yourself, that may need to be addressed even more with shifting the mindset on and acknowledging how we talk to ourselves, because how we talk to ourselves is what our own brain believes the most.
Mhm.
And so that needs to shift and be more positive talk, more. You got to talk more move looking forward than looking at what didn't work out or what doesn't look good enough or isn't presentable.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So like I said, one big strategy that's usually taught is being okay with mistakes, and that's
Yeah,
difficult.
but how do you teach yourself that?
Well, like I said, or not mistakes or things not being perfect, right? Doesn't need to be mistakes. It, like I said, me putting out a video, which I would have never put out, but had somebody else put out for me, so it goes out, and then learning to be okay with it. Learning, you know what, it was fine. At least I'm and giving credit for just doing it. So, or you know, learning to leave dishes out. Some perfectionists like to have it all cleaned up. It needs to be all neat and structured in a certain way. Definitely something I need to, like, not having like my books perfectly, organized and stuff. They used to be they used to be much better organized, to be okay with something being a little off and not all perfect. So starting with like how your shelf looks like, for example,
Oh my
to
God,
or
don't look
does
at my.
no, but a perfectionist likes to have it all the same way. Like if a vase is standing somewhere, it needs to be at the same spot. Um, and if it's just somebody comes and puts a little over it, it's like, right? So to learn, you know what? It's okay. The vase is on the other side of the shelf. It's still in the shelf. It's okay. It's
Oh my
hilarious,
God.
but that's how perfectionists are. Like, and it's crazy because you can come in a room as a perfectionist, and like I said, I used to be like that. I come in the room and I'm like, oh, something moved. Yeah, just an inch.
Oh my God. Okay,
And
so I had a friend who was like this, and it was really destructive to her
oh
life.
yeah, it totally
And
can
I
destruct your
mean,
life.
to the point where, like, I can understand this. I can understand it a little bit where, you're having a dinner party and people are over and da da da. And you want to clean up a little bit afterwards. But it was to the point where, like, she couldn't sit down and hang out with her friends until everything was put
Everything
away
was cleaned up. Oh
perfectly.
yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But then you're missing out, and you're also stressing out the people that are there because they feel like they need to be helping, but you can't
Yeah.
help because you can't do it in the right way.
So one thing I did for that, like for example, when my kids were little, we had that one living room area that there's no toys because I could not handle just toys all over
Right.
flying around.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I needed that room to be able to go down anytime, and I could have the little entrance living room right there. That's where the toys were. I could
Mhm.
have those laying there, leaving them there because I knew I could go in the other room and not see it. And that was one
Yeah.
way to handle because otherwise I would have cleaned up toys all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I'm not teaching my kids that they got to clean up themselves, but I would have been cleaning up and then I would have never had time to sit down.
Right.
And then that affects my health, right? So for me, it was one room needed to, that was a no toy zone. That was one of my
That seems like a
strategies.
really good balance. I
Yeah.
mean, you have one room for yourself where you could sit in some calmness,
Yeah.
and the
But
other room is a little chaos.
I cannot sit there when there's chaos, then I have that urge to get up and clean it up. And I won't sit down until I'm done with all of that. So I've learned to separate that in the environment. I had to, like, because it used to be too, it's like I would have to first have to clean up the house and the kitchen because before I actually do something else. And then you don't get to it because all you do
Right.
is cleaning up, like your
Right.
friend, right?
Yeah.
So it can absolutely impact your life tremendously, and you end up missing out, or you're not getting the things done that matter most. The
Mhm.
priorities shift. So I had to also learn, like, nope, kitchen, it's okay. I'm leaving the kitchen. I'm gonna first do my work stuff that I need to get done, and then I do the kitchen later. So that's another strategy of, that's what I mean by imperfect, or if something else happens, to kind of just let it be, right? It's okay. It's okay if it's not all, figuring out first what's priority. And I couldn't leave it all a mess, but it's okay to leave a little bit out on the counter and going like, you know what, I'm just going to remove myself from that area. I'm going to a different location or a different, facing different direction in a room. Don't look at it. And that's a way to start kind of dealing with that. Um, Again, I kind of, I think, mentioned it already, but the other thing is, perfectionists really like to always look at the outcome, at the end product, to really focus more on the growth along the, like, it's a journey, recognizing it's the journey, a process to reach your goal. celebrating, acknowledging yourself along the way for what you accomplished to reach the bigger goal, to look more at the growth in general. And it's a learning process. That's one thing my self-talk was really like, you know what? It might not be perfect right now. It's good because I'm learning and it's getting better, and that's what matters. And so I had to remind myself a lot on the way I talk to myself and stop thinking about what I think it could look like or be like. So, and then always, using techniques to calm down. So when you come in a room and the vase moved an inch,
use your breathing techniques.
do a breathing technique. For me, it was more the talk, kind of like, it's okay, it's still in the shelf. So, but well, I can laugh about it now, but it's funny when you do that, you feel the emotions coming up and you feel like your heart rate's going up, and it's like, why?
That is wild.
Because
so do you have any last piece of advice or words of wisdom to anyone who may be a perfectionist or may not recognize that they're a perfectionist?
I think that would have been my biggest suggestion, is start doing a self-assessment, self-awareness, checking in with yourself, and pay attention to how your emotions are. Is there something coming up? Are you getting more irritated, more your heart rate going up, your emotions in general? Like, how do you feel when things are going on? So checking in first and acknowledging that you have a fixed mindset as a perfectionist. And a lot of perfectionists have a growth mindset in other areas, and recognizing that is a fixed mindset, that perfection is a fixed mindset. And that comes into, I know, I love to just one little short section on some people also may have a fixed mindset and want things to be perfect, and they might be waiting it out, right? They may not be the perfectionist, but they still sit and wait for it to be
They're waiting
perfect.
for it to be
And
perfect.
and that's still a perfectionist mindset. And where do we to recognize, I'm like, why do I wait for something to be perfect if I can do something along the way to move things forward? Because at the end of the day, it's about the journey and not the end product. And so either if you're a perfectionist, acknowledge and embrace the journey. And if you're the kind who's like, oh, I'm just gonna wait and someday it's gonna be perfect, well, that's the same kind of mindset.
Yeah.
And that's not gonna, it may never happen unless you start doing something to move things forward. And it's the same thing. You got to embrace the journey, doing little steps forward, because at the end of the day, there is never really a perfect, and that's a problem in general. Like, even perfectionists have a certain vision of mind. They get there and then it's still not perfect.
Yeah. Right.
Which then comes into a lot of other fears, and then it can be self-esteem and confident issues that are popping up. So recognize where you're at, embrace your emotions, the self-awareness, and acknowledge it's a journey. It's a journey of moving forward in life, and things don't have to be perfect. Life goes on, but we can make it much healthier for ourselves when it's not all perfect.
Yeah, I love it. You have a lot of good advice.
Awesome. Until
you.
next time, and it definitely is a fun journey. So life is exciting.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.